What is going on, everyone? What is going on? We are here live to talk about a couple of things that haven't been talked about very often, um, especially on my channel, and that's going to be warm season stuff, and it's also going to be Bermuda grass. Normally, I'm calling Bermuda grass a weed, and in a cool season lawn, that's exactly what it is. But when you're actually trying to grow it intentionally, a lot of places down south and hey, up north also now that we've got this new elite cultivar that's out there called Ironcutter. We'll get into that a little bit more, but it's also an option a little further north than what it used to be. So let's get into it. I am going to go ahead and bring on our guest right now. And I have here joining me in the middle is going to be Ben from the channel The Long Guardian. Ben's out in St. Louis. And on the far right there, you've got Adam Russell from MVP Genetics. What's going on, fellas? How's it going?
Pretty good, Cam. Thanks for having us tonight.
Yeah, Cam, we're good, man. Thank you.
Cool, fellas. Man, it's glad to have you on. First off, I just want to say appreciate y'all for taking the time out to be able to join us here. And we're gonna kick back. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna have a conversation that we haven't really talked a lot about. I don't think there's a lot of content out there about it, especially on the tubes, and let alone iron cutter, but also sprigging that whole process and kind of what that is. So, Ben, I'll toss it over to you for a quick introduction. Let the people know where you're located, what you're growing, what you got going on over there.
Yeah, so I'm Ben. I have a YouTube channel, Lawn Guardian. I'm on other social media stuff, but it's more of a hobby for me to do all that kind of stuff. I just like to take care of grass and make it look great. I have about 9,000 square feet of total lawn, and then this past year I killed off half of my lawn that was turf type tall fescue and did a full renovation with iron cutter via Sprigs, and then I still have my front and back are um, tall fescue as just like the side used to be. So that is what I'm doing right now here in St. Louis.
Cool. Yeah, we'll get into the pictures, but killing off your side plot, man, that was hard to watch because it was looking good right about the time that you killed it off too. It was coming out of that peak uh, spring green up, spring flush for cool season, and you hit it right upside the head with some holy water.
Yeah, that was a time that I almost talked myself out of doing the renovation, but then I
I
reminded
bet.
myself everybody's no offense to people that take care of grass, but everybody's yard really looks good around that time without doing much to it. At least cool season grass. Here in the St. Louis area, everybody's lawn for the most part looks pretty good without doing much of anything, just because it's prime optimal temperatures for cool season grass here. And then I knew maybe a month or so later, things are going to turn for the worst, and it's just going to be an uphill battle. At least for me, that's what it's been in my yard with cool season stuff. Just with maintaining it with fungicides, being in the right fungicide program, dialing in the water. Everything has to be right on point here when it comes to cool season grass in the summer, even with tall fescue stuff. Because really, tall fescue is going to be your most successful cool season grass here
Yeah.
in this part of the Midwest. I've seen people try to do Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye. It just doesn't. It doesn't last. It can't sustain the heat and humidity we get here. So
Yeah, yeah. I feel you. So Adam, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let the people know a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Cam. Yeah, my name is Adam Russell. I lead the division of our company called MVP Genetics that develops and licenses warm season turf grasses to sod producers. Uh, yeah, north of Atlanta, I have three kids. Uh, Landscape architect from the University of Georgia, former golf course shaper. Been in the industry 15 years and been in the development side close to 10. And yeah, kind of done a little bit of everything, dabbled in a little bit of everything: sports turf, golf, regular LCO, lawn care type, and then I've done the technical side from the landscape architecture piece of my career. So done a little bit of everything, seen a lot of grass, killed a lot of grass, and now working to develop the best grasses we can for you guys. So it's cool to be part of this process. Cool to be here, and uh, and see everything come to fruition. Hopefully,
Yeah. Yeah, they say the longer you work in grass, if you haven't killed a lot of grass, you either aren't trying hard enough or you're just not doing it right.
very true statement. And I have killed a lot. That's the only way I learn.
Yeah, cool, cool. Well, again, man, I appreciate y'all fellas for taking the time out. We'll go ahead and jump into it. Now that we know who we've got here on the panel, Adam, I'm gonna go ahead and toss it over to you and talk to us a little bit about Ironcutter. People, I know they've been watching my channel. They've heard me talking about it. I've been posting about it and everything. The renovation that I've done with my pops. So let me put one caveat out there at the beginning of this live. I know I do cool season stuff. Tonight is a warm season conversation. Everything that we're talking about tonight is about warm season grass for Bermuda, specifically the Ironcutter Bermuda. So I know most of y'all tune in for a cool season tips and information on my channel, but we are talking warm season tonight. All right, so I just wanted to put that out there, not to confuse people, but we are talking warm season Bermuda grass tonight. All right, so Adam, talk to us about Ironcutter. What makes it so new? What's good about it? What's the eliteness that comes along with Ironcutter? Kind of give us some history on it and some of the benefits of it.
Yeah, so first off, we think it's the finest textured Bermuda grass, the thinnest leaf blade, and there's some verticality to that leaf blade. So it has a really good look at low heights of cut. And when I say low, it can go down to putting green heights, all the way up to what we would consider a low or maybe even a no maintenance type of lawn. Just to plant it and forget it. But what we saw, and one of the reasons we selected it and wanted to start developing it out of the turf plots, was we saw a really tough grass from Oklahoma that didn't die in the cold, but also did really, really well in the middle of summer when the heat is strongest and looked good at all points, kind of doing it. So we saw a grass that we could take a lot of places, that we could push the boundaries of Bermuda grass and where it grows, certainly north and north transition. And then, we started to put it under a protocol, more of a high input protocol, what we would call a golf and sports turf type of regimen. And that's where it really started to shine. So we knew we had drought from Oklahoma. We knew we had pretty. We knew we had the lawn side. And, at that point, it was okay, can this be an all purpose? Can this be something that go into golf and sports turf? And then once we had that data, from the NTEP trials from 2013 to 2017, it kind of proved what we had hoped. Which, yeah, it looks fantastic under those type of high inputs. So we've got this broadly adapted, cold tolerant, fine textured, beautiful Bermuda grass that comes out of the Oklahoma, and I'll say Oklahoma breeding lineage of Dr. Charles Talifero. So Dr. Talifero is a really, really important guy, really cool guy. He's 83, I think, now. So Doc has seen and done it all. So he's bred vegetative grasses, non-seeded warm season Bermuda grasses. He's done seeded type Bermuda grasses, but he is the only person I know left alive that worked with Tifway 419
Mm,
originally, like down in Tifton, Georgia, and you're talking about early '60s, and he's still breeding Bermuda grasses today. So that's where the name came from. I named it. We started to develop it, and I'm sure we can get into a little bit of that. But it's just this grass that kept passing all the tests, and over the course of, call it, 10 years of development, because Ironcutter was isolated in 2007.
okay.
We tried to throw every test we could at it and push it with every kind of regimen and protocol we could find. and then you get to the point where you know you've got something, and then you have to get with sod producers and figure out how to develop it for them to release it. And then once it gets to that level, then you start to see it. So from an age standpoint, I tell people Ironcutter is very new. It's the newest of this class of elite Bermuda grasses that have come out, and there have been some really good ones that have come out lately. Uh, you know, from a commercial or a public availability, it's brand new. Would be the youngest. From a development side, 2007. So, what are we now? 16 years. So we've been developing this grass for 16 years, and we're just getting to the point where a lot of people are starting to see it in the U.S. and around the world. So it takes a long, long time to create grasses and test grasses and push grasses, because once we release it to you guys, it better hold up. Like, it better be bulletproof, because if you find a fatal flaw that we didn't find, it's a no go. You guys demand a lot, and you should. Your grasses should be better than what we've had in the past. So we know when we're developing something and coming out with it, like, it's got to be strong and it's got to be tough, and it better do something different than what we've had before. And so that's what we saw in Ironcutter, and you hope it works out that way for everybody. And so far, knock on wood, it has. Everybody's loved it. Everybody's been happy with it. Sod producers are enjoying growing it, and we're getting our name out, and we're getting our program out to a number of different people in the U.S., certainly around the world. So it's been fun to be part of that process, and we'll continue this with other species and other grasses. We hope to bring in zoysia grasses and St. Augustine's, those warm season grasses that dominate a big part of the planet, to go with what had historically been a cool season grass seed company. So that's the hard thing for people to see, is like MVP Genetics, my side, is connected to Mountain View Seeds, which is a cool season, large cool season grass company. Many people know that. It's been around longer. They've seen that grass seed part. But we're going to attempt to become one of the only combined companies that does grass seed and then non-seeded grasses under one roof. And that's never really been attempted before. So Ironcutter was the first introduction. We hope to have more. Hopefully have another Bermuda grass that's different but complementary to Ironcutter, does something different, and then keep releasing grasses for the benefit of warm season people in a lot of warm season areas. So that's the cliff notes on Ironcutter.
That's a heck of a start right there for your first warm season. I can tell you that.
We got lucky. You have to get lucky in grass development. There's got to be a point where you can test your way out of a grass. You can test and test and test and test, and at a certain point, you just got to believe you've got something good, and you've got to release it. And that's where we got to with Ironcutter. And you send it out, and you hope everybody likes it as much as you did when you were developing it and looking at it and testing it. So far, that's worked. I hope we're sitting here, 40 years from now, and people still have the same opinion and still love the grass like that. That's my level of success. That's what we're going for.
Cool, cool.
Adam, I know this is off, not necessarily off topic, but does it always take 16 years for a grass to be before it's like made public to people? Does it always take that long, or was it just happen to be that long for Ironcutter?
Yeah, we've had some take longer. The average is about 10 years for a grass. So
Okay.
development of grass, when you first isolate something in a plot, and you go, "Ooh, I think we might have something." Just an experimental number amongst thousands of grasses, and so that's where we started with this. This was a space plant nursery in Oklahoma, and Dr. Charles Taliaferro narrows it down and narrows it down, and then we isolate and pick one, and then you start to test it against all the different protocols that people will want: drought, low input, high inputs, traffic, fertility, disease. You're looking for those benefits, those metrics, and then you're testing them over multiple seasons to make sure nothing pops up, that there's not a disease that'll take it out, or a bug, or it'll fall apart in an area of the country. So yeah, it takes a lot of calendar seasons. I've got a zoysia grass that was isolated in 1978, and we're just getting to the point where we might release it. So there are grasses that sit on
Wow.
the
Wow.
shelf that can hang around that long. Conversely, there are some that might be shorter. You can fast track it, and we would like to fast track it, because in the end, it does cost more money to hang on and keep looking at grasses. And some grasses fall by the wayside, and then you'll come back and look at them in a different light and think, okay, that's releasable. But in general, the average is about 10 years for cool season grass cultivars, warm season grass cultivars. Um, and so Ironcutter, we'll call it year 16. Tracking, maybe a little bit older than what we wanted, but we wanted to make sure we had something good. And I think it's proven us right in those decisions, that we made the right call to keep looking at it and to wait, even if the release maybe made us the youngest Bermuda. It's great to be first in a cycle. So our cycle is Tiff Tough. You'll have Tahoma 31 and then Ironcutter as the newest. And you'll have some other grasses, I'm sure, that'll come out, but they typically run in 10-year cycles. So we started in about 16, and you'll start to see some other grasses, maybe 25, 26, 27. But we're already looking of like, how can we make Ironcutter better? But we got to start now, so 15 years from now, we can have something that might be better.
Right.
It's a process; it never stops.
So, one thing that I want to hit on: vegetative versus seeded. So, I know you mentioned that. Just touch on that just a little bit. Just kind of explain from a homeowner standpoint how they may how this would have how a seeded variety versus a vegetative installation to them may look.
Yeah, so seeded grasses versus non-seeded grasses or vegetative grasses, they're not too different, and especially in warm season grasses, a seeded Bermuda grass is a cultivar and an experimental plot that produces a lot of seed. And so seeded type Bermuda grasses can have great color and establishment, density and texture. But the point of it is to produce seed, as much consistent seed as possible. So it's one side, where you produce a lot of seed, as much seed as you can. And then on the other side, the non-seeded or the vegetative side, you don't want to produce any seed. You want something that's stable and sterile and completely opposite from your seeded types. But from a breeding standpoint, that mechanism and what you're searching for is not very different. And so it's been unusual that there's not been a company that's tried to do both, where they've tried to develop and create and research and breed grasses that are both seeded and non-seeded or vegetative. So from a planting standpoint and from an end user standpoint, a seeded type grass, you would plant it, and that seed is, it's hard for people to see this, but like a turf type tall fescue, there's not going to be any viability in that seed once you plant it. We have seed stock and we have certain requirements for farming and production out in Oregon. Conversely, seeded Bermuda grass, that's going to be something where you're not going to produce as much viable seed, except for if you're in a production system. Vegetative, you want it to be as stable as possible, because some vegetative grasses, with their aggressiveness, you buy it in sod or sprig form only. It doesn't come in seed form. So everybody always asks about Tifway 419 seed. Well, it's a sterile hybrid. It doesn't have that. There is no seed. Ironcutter is that. It's a sterile vegetative hybrid that does not produce seed, and you wanting that for the stability. So when we take live plant material, it's consistent whether you're in Maryland, North Carolina, Australia, wherever you are. But from a breeding standpoint, when you physically breed parents and plants together, you're looking for the one that flushes a bunch of seed heads, and you go, okay, well, that may be a seeded type Bermuda grass. And then you find some that doesn't produce any seed heads, and you go, well, we may have a vegetative type. Like, that's not very different when you're in a space plant nursery with 10,000 plants. You just have to isolate them and then test them differently. And so for us, we said, well, why don't we do and own both, and then have that ability to market both and get those out to people. But from a planting standpoint, prep's not very much different. Cool season seed or warm season seed versus a vegetative. You still have to do your due diligence to start with soil tests and installs and the way that you do them, but they function different. I can only send live plant material so far with a vegetative grass. The benefit of seed is I can send it pretty much all over the world and know it's going to arrive in viable condition. The business model for getting them to customers and end users is different. we need help. We need sod farmers. On the grass seed side, we use people, wholesale distributors, on what we call our Mountain View seed side. So people ask and they'll see both divisions, and it's Mountain View Seeds is all seed. MVP Genetics is all vegetative, non-seeded. So it just takes people a little bit to get used to that. But from a breeding standpoint, that's not very different.
Cam, we can't hear you.
And then I
No,
think for
you're good now.
yeah, I had muted myself earlier. I think from a homeowner standpoint, I just wanted to make that a clarification there, just so um, there are certain things that you can get in seed. I think from just a Bermuda grass, since we're talking Bermuda, I think Rio, I think is one of the Mountain View seed Bermuda grass varieties that's
Yes,
out there. So that just
it'd be
from
the
a
closest to Ironcutter, and people go, "Well, are they siblings? Are they cousins?" It's like, kind of, but not really. Uh, it's like if you had a vegetative and a seeded type Bermuda grass, which ones would match the closest? It would be Rio and Ironcutter.
okay.
Those are the ones where if somebody planted if you had one part of your yard that was one and one part of your lawn that was another, then you might not notice a huge difference, except for the fact that the Rio, if it got stressed out, or if you maintain it a different way, might throw a few more seed heads, because that's
Okay.
what it's supposed to do. Now those seed heads aren't as viable in your lawn as they are for us in sod product in turf grass production. There's a different process than somebody just growing in their lawn. So you'll hear people that go, well, I'll just grow up my lawn and get grass seed out of it, and it's like, it doesn't
Yeah,
work
it doesn't
like
work
that.
like
It's
it
like,
doesn't quite work like that.
that's those are the two closest. So yeah, from the Mountain View seed side, Rio would be, I don't know, call them second, third cousins to Ironcutter, uh,
Because
but
it's from the south.
isolated and developed. Yeah,
You
that's
know,
right.
they are related.
It's all Bermuda grass. It all comes from the same place. At some point, it's all kind of related. So
Cool. All right. So, from I'm gonna jump back to the vegetative side of that. So, when we're going ready to get ready to put those in, we're gonna talk about these sprigs. So, this may be a term that the listeners may or may not have heard of before. So, what is sprigging? Like, what is a sprig? Like, how are they harvested? We know they don't come from seeds. So, like, how do you end up with your sprigs? Like, from they come from a sod farm. Kind of walk us through that process there.
yeah, for sure. So you take established sod fields of a vegetative grass or a grass that can regenerate, usually from rhizomes or stolons. And so you'll take that and you'll harvest it mechanically some way. Usually it's a thresher or some sort of flail motion that will take an established piece of sod and chop it up into smaller pieces. And because each of those pieces has a viable regeneration mechanism, you have the ability to plant each one of those individual sprigs, and those become a new plant. So you can take a sod field that's established, let's say at Collins Wharf right there, and you're using a mechanical thresher and a set of teeth at the bottom, like what you're seeing here on screen, and then you're mechanically going through and flailing that turf grass that's established. It runs up a conveyor belt, and it spits out viable plant material. So that plant material that's coming out into that trailer is still alive. It's still able to regenerate, and that's the beauty of Bermuda grass. The aggressiveness is inherent in the plant structure. So it has rhizomes and stolons, and it can regenerate from both. And so what makes it borderline invasive makes it a great aggressive plant that makes a fantastic home lawn that can resist all the environmental conditions. But you chop it up, and then you put a big amount of it together, and then you can take those individual pieces and throw it out into a lawn, and it will all regenerate, if those sprigs stay viable. And that's where the trick is getting that plant material that came out at the sod farm, getting it down to your lawn or wherever you're going to put an application in, getting it down as quickly as possible. Because you do have live plant material that doesn't have anything attached to it and is trying to die. And so you want to keep it alive and you want to keep it in place and install it as soon as possible. But yeah, that's the beauty of many of the warm season grasses is they can regenerate that way.
So, what is? I know you hit on one of those things is getting it down as soon as possible, being that you're dealing with a live plant there. What's that timeline look like from like harvest to wanting to have it installed and having some water on it?
Yeah, I mean the pros are trying to do it as soon as possible, right? Like for me, it's a shot clock in my head. Like as soon as it gets harvested, I mean we're dying, and you don't want to be over the top, but I think of it dying every second. Any hour that I can save or get it in the ground, that plant material is not going to die back as much. It's going to be more aggressive, and so I personally like to get it within 24, certainly 48 hours from that digging into the ground. Now, depending on your climate variables, depending on how hot it is when you do it, how big is your pile of sprigs? Did you put them together? Did you separate them water content and heat and how you transported it? All of these things can make a difference. But in general, you want to get those sprigs down. I'll say up to 3 days, and I truly like as quickly as possible between 24 and 48 hours after they were harvested.
Cool. Yeah, and that's one of the things. So shout out to my man Jason over there on the Eastern Shore at
Sure.
Collins Wharf. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So which is where I got my sprigs from. So I transported mine from Maryland all the way down to North Carolina, where I did my pops renovation at. So um, of course, things don't always go as planned. I was planning to actually be able to have them down there and start putting them in that same day, as I was gonna get them installed. But of course, there was delays and everything else. But we ended up getting them down the following day. So I got them down within probably 36. It was they were probably on the ground within 36 hours. All of them
It's
over that
huge.
over that whole 20,000 square feet. They were all on the ground getting water to them within 36 hours, which we didn't have very little dieback on them.
See a couple people in the chats talking about how long is a sprig viable. It really depends. Water, temperature,
Yeah,
wind, how good the sod was kept, and what condition it was in. I mean, I've seen some, I've seen some viability in a week and a half, but you start talking about really low percentages. I mean,
yeah.
you get a super sack or you get a certain amount of sprigs and you clump them together and you put them in a big pile and you take them down the road or you set them in a place. I start getting nervous. If you can still see green leaf tissue, if there's still something green uh, in the plant when you plant it, I typically feel pretty good. Trying to think of what's the latest that I've ever sprigged something. I mean, it's week and a half, and we weren't expecting much out of it. Again, the plant's separated from the soil, and it's trying to die. Everything's going against it at that point. It doesn't have any backup system for it to live. So it is really important when you do get sprigs that you do try to get them in as quickly as possible. Look, things happen, freight, transport, temperature goes wrong, it rains, it doesn't rain. I mean, we've seen it all and gone through it. But in general, whatever you can do to control your variables to make sure once it's dug, you get that in the ground. I don't like to wait on my sprigs once they show up, and the pros that do this a lot. When those sprigs get harvested, it's a race to get them in the ground, and they don't sit at the end user site for very long. So I'd encourage anybody to say, but I'll say week and a half, and that's really pushing. That's probably a 20%.
Wow.
Uh, that's really that's really rolling the dice. I like 24 to 48 hours after you've harvested.
Ben, I think you got yours down pretty fresh, right? Yours is on the ground within hours
Within
after.
within a couple hours after being harvested, they were all on the ground, and I was watering it. And that was
Makes a
just
huge
because.
difference, right?
What's that?
I said it makes a huge difference, right? Like when you can do that, you saw what happened when you do. That's a successful. we know we've got a successful chance to be really, really good when it's something that soon.
Yeah. I would
Yeah,
say I think Cam's kind of yours seemed to based on because since you were like a couple of weeks behind me when I compared where you were weekly compared to where I was, it seemed like you were a little bit further ahead, but I know there's a lot of variables that can play into that soil and all that kind of stuff. So I don't necessarily think it was, um, you know, just the quickness of when I got mine down because yours, like I said, yours was growing from what I could see on a weekly basis a little bit better than mine, at least from the fill-in factor, or from what you were sharing on Instagram and stuff like
yeah,
that. But like I said, I know there's a lot of variables that play into the whole growing process and how quickly it's going to happen. So
Soil
yeah.
temps, soil temps are massive, man. I mean, your soil temp difference. Missouri was cold. I mean, it was cold for a
yes,
long time,
And I was
and even
thinking
hmm
compared to
that's what I was gonna point to. I was like, my soil temps are probably warmer, probably
yeah,
a good
probably
amount
true.
warmer than yours. Um,
I did
Down
want
here
to
in North
point out
Carolina,
real quick
it was
because
cooking.
Kevin Shepard in the chat, he was the guy. If you add him, he's been tagged in on Instagram. I believe
yeah,
it's I want feature is his. He's in the upstate New York.
yeah.
Um,
Wow, that was wild.
that Brandon mailed him a piece of iron cutter sod or something like that, and he chewed it up and put it in a small plot in his yard somewhere that he's growing it in
Wh-
New York. So
Okay, I didn't
Which
know
is
who that
great.
was.
Mind blowing, and I can't wait to see it get through winter. And I hope everything goes right, and I'm sure it will. We've been in some really aggressive places for Bermuda like that, where we're getting really far north, Central Park. I mean, we've been to Utah and Denver and seen some very, very cold temperatures. So I know it'll live, and I want it to be the best it can. Sod's better. I mean, sod just has better. You're bringing a layer of soil with that, right?
sure.
So whenever you ship sod, you've got a bit of a backup system that you typically don't have with sprigs. So, sod I feel a lot better with. I mean, I've laid sod that's, I mean, 2 weeks on a pallet and it looks completely dead and brown, but it's got that little bit of soil and that little bit of moisture, and it pops back just fine. Sod is a lot easier, I'll say, but again, there's the cost factor.
Yeah,
So some of what you save with sprigging, what you're getting with that lesser cost, you have to think about those details a little bit more. Of okay, how quick am I going to get it? I can't let it sit around. You don't have to baby it more. The prep work's pretty much the same, but sod can live and preserve. So people go, which one's better, sod or sprigging? And it's like, just whatever suits your situation from when you're going to do it. Like you have to think about that. So sometimes it may be worth it to pay for sod based on what's happening or what variables you have. Other times you can go, all right, I feel confident enough to get sprigs in. But there's a level of thought, a little bit of extra that you got to go through with sprigs because you don't have that soil layer that you do with sod. So I'm glad that even though it sat in a box for 5 days, it looked like that. Yeah, it worked out. Uh,
but
Adam,
so
can you talk about because you told me about how it was how you guys tested it, and as far as like in the cold conditions, because I get
yeah,
skeptics emailing or messaging me all the time about that, specifically people in St. Louis. So would you
sure.
mind? Sorry to interrupt what you're doing, Cam. I
oh
just wanted
no,
to.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, this is what really surprised us about Ironcutter. Like before, Ironcutter or this new wave of Bermuda grasses, you'd not seen this extreme cold tolerance. You had some that would kind of sneak into the northern transition zone and float up into places you typically don't see Bermudas, New Yorks and Ohio's and northern Illinois and even out into the mountain states, northern California. Um, Ironcutter did it and did it flawlessly. Oklahoma, where this grass was created, very, very hot, 110 in the summertime, uh, negative 15 in the winter, and didn't die. And so we kept seeing that over and over and over again. We kept testing it in as harsh conditions as we can. So right now, the current record is negative 15 degrees actual temperature,
Whew.
and soil temps were 19, I believe, at 2-inch soil depth and no winter kill. So that's the coldest that we've gotten over an extended period of time. Probably the longest event we've had. We went to negative 13 in Enid, Oklahoma. I think it was 2 years ago. So we had 350 plus hours of clouds, like heavy, heavy clouds, little snow cover, a lot of wind desiccation, and we still had green leaf tissue in the plant. So you're talking about a huge winter storm event, and that's what it's trying to make it through. Because when Bermuda grass dies, it's typically some sort of a winter kill or variable spring conditions where the plant thinks it's going to grow, and then all of a sudden you go back cold again. That's what you worry about with Bermuda grass,
Mm.
and we just have not seen that, to the point where even now people ask me like, where is the line for growing Bermuda grass with Ironcutter? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, we just took it to Western New York. Like, I mean, it's thriving in New York City. Denver at a half an inch. Utah. We're going to try to send some to Canada and see if we can kill it. It's like we're trying to figure that out as much as everybody else. But it went from maybe it can grow and do well in DC and into Ohio, and then now I've got Northwestern University, 25 miles north of Chicago, and it's done fantastic. They're playing games on us, the northernmost Bermuda grass in the country. We've got people in Michigan that are doing this. So it's like, yeah, I think we can do Ohio, because after this last winter, we saw a really tough and a harsh one, but we had had a few before that one in testing, and it was like, it just didn't die. And we tested it everywhere. I mean, golf courses and heights of cut, and you would expose this grass like we would, if it had snow cover, we would rake it off and try to kill it. Like we try to kill grasses to find out what's the line. And so far, I have not found the line with Ironcutter. So it gives me a lot of confidence when people go, can it really grow in St. Louis? Like, if I've got a grower there, just trust that he's grown it about 2 or 3 years before it gets to the point where it's available.
Mm-hmm.
And if that grower believes in it, like, it will work there. And that's what's been fun to see. So like, yeah, we need Ohio growers, but there's 5 athletic fields that Ryan DeMay's had, I
That's
think
what I
now, in
that's what I was getting ready to say. Ryan
the
DeMay's putting
Columbus
in
area.
full athletic fields out there with it.
I mean, there's always some issue, right? It's not going to be 100% all the time when you put traffic on top of it, but it's worked and it's made life easier. I think from talking to Ryan. So you go, I mean, we didn't think Columbus was going to be a place where it did great, and because of the volatility of the climate, Purdue right here, this it's brought it into play. Northwestern has really helped. Central Park. I mean, for the first time in 168 years, they planned a Bermuda grass install after testing it for 2 years with traffic, and it worked. And so it's continued to work. UK, I mean, that's a 30-day difference. Brentsville, that's 80 days at a high school level with a bunch of delays. That was not a great 80 days for Drew Miller there. A lot of construction delays, a lot of times when he could not get on that field, and he pulled that off in 80 days, and it was, I mean, it looks fantastic. So that's what we're seeing, and then you see this, this is what people get excited about, where you'll hear a lot of Bermuda can't stripe. And this is what we saw in the aesthetics of it, where it's like, you see somebody like David and Mr. Lushlawn down on the border, and it doesn't really go dormant down there. And you're seeing stripeability that's almost approaching cool season grass. And it's like, wow, okay, so we don't die in the cold, and we kind of look like cool season grass can certainly match up to it. This is Northwestern. So Northwestern had a place on their field where it wasn't covered with blankets. It was completely exposed to the elements, a check plot to see if this grass would live. So we took a
Okay.
piece of that in after this winter to give us a clue whether we were going to have trouble under the blanket part of the field. Because if this germinated 100%, then we know we've made it through winter.
Yeah.
And so this the check piece. This is what we put inside, and once it started to grow and eventually got to 100%, regermination or reemergence, spring green up, then we knew that we weren't going to have any kind of a winter kill issue or a problem underneath the blankets. And so that again just keeps giving you more and more confidence when people go, can it do St. Louis? Can it do Kansas City? Can it do Washington D.C.? Can it do Ohio? Yeah, you look at these climate numbers, and there's more volatility, and that's part of the reason you see stuff like the rhizomes at Northwestern. So that picture is from the spring, and Zach, who's done an incredible job managing the surface year round, um, he goes, "These are the biggest rhizomes I've ever seen." and the size of that gives the Bermuda, even for a Bermuda grass, it gives it a reserve system where it can hang on in the
Yeah.
winter. Where it can, those are carbohydrates. It's got something underneath the soil that will keep it living, and that's what's allowed it to push up into areas that 10 years ago it was not an option. It wasn't in the conversation. Now it's at least in a conversation of, okay, maybe it's bluegrass, maybe it's Bermuda grass, maybe it's tall fescue, and again, both have. I've got a bluegrass field in Atlanta, Georgia. So the cool thing in grass breeding right now is that we're seeing more options and we're giving people more options. Heat tolerant, cool season grasses and cold tolerant, warm season grasses. So then it just becomes about choice for the individual on what's going to be the best for you. But this was part of it. We started looking at it and go, well, if it can hang on like this and
Yeah.
25 miles north of Chicago. And again, this was not an easy winter. Um, yeah, it's a cold tolerant Bermuda grass.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm interested in really being able to see, given my pops and his location, where he is down in North Carolina, like literally how long it really stays green. Because a lot of times, man, it can still be 70s at Christmas time. Like we've been out in shorts and a t-shirt and at Christmas throwing the football around. Like so, it may not be actively growing and
Yep.
everything in those temperatures, but I doubt that it'll be fully dormant either. At that point, given those kind of temperatures.
That's another thing I was going to ask Adam, because that's another thing that a lot of the homeowner DIYers that are skeptical about are not just the cold aspect of like, well, how long is it going to stay green? And I know for a fact, well, from what Demay showed me and what I've talked to you about, is that the dormancy, it's not going to be like it's prime green, uh,
Yep.
late fall or anything like that here in St. Louis, but it's probably still going to be holding some decent color for it being Bermuda. Um, from what I've seen, just because I've even messed with common Bermuda here, and I knew the color wise, just with common or wild Bermuda, the color wasn't going as dormant as quickly as people think.
Yep.
Plus, I also like to remind people that tall fescue also turns pretty brown here in St. Louis once it
Mine
gets
does.
cold enough.
Mine does too. It
I
looks like
love I
Bermuda.
love snow. I mean, people go, well, it's going to turn dormant, and it's like, well, you just haven't ever seen Kentucky bluegrass because it's been under snow where you are. Like it's dormant too. Like your tall fescue's dormant the same way. So it's like,
Yeah,
what does it matter? Do you want it to look good when you want to be on top of it? Like
Yep.
that's the
exactly.
part where we go. And it's not one versus the other. Like again, we're a cool season grass company on one side of our business that sells 80 million pounds of seed. Like we've got some great options on that side. We just want to be able to to offer both and develop both. So when somebody asks us, it's not a bias there. There's not where we're going, oh man, we really want you to buy a cool season grass, so we're going to say this is the best. It's like now you're going, okay, tell me your situation and we'll tell you what's best for
We'll
you. It
tell
might
you
be
what
cool season
fits.
grass, it might be warm season grass, because somebody will tell me, man, I got a lot of shade. How shade tolerant is Ironcutter? And you go, compared to other Bermuda grasses, pretty good. Compared to tall fescue, terrible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like people are surprised about that, and it's
Yeah.
like that's the difference. That's how you decide, compared to what, and when you want to put it in or when you don't. But man, if I've got snow, like that's insulation. If you can keep
Hmm.
snow, and that's been the issue, is that in a lot of places in the U.S. there hasn't been the snow cover. It's been extremely variable. Chicago's and the Columbuses and going long stretches before you even get snow, and getting warmer temps through the end of the fall. But then once you do get snow, you're getting 10 plus inches in a winter storm. Bermuda grass loves that. We'll take the insulation all day and it won't die. It's when you expose it to wind and maybe some drought in the lead up, and then you have variable spring temps where you're warm and cold and warm and cold. That's when you tend to worry about Bermuda grass. And we had some of that this year. But I was really proud of how the grass performed in a tough winter that we probably hadn't seen in, I'll call it, 5 to 10 years, depending on where you were. And it passed with flying colors. So it keeps us feeling confident about where we can continue to push that line. And so I leave it to a lot of the experts that are smarter than me, but I'm happy with how far we've pushed it up to give people an opportunity. And just like Western New York, like we didn't think it was going to go there. Let's see if it can, and then we'll have more confidence the next time.
Cool. I did see a pretty good question that came in. How does it blend with the 365 SS, as in a Blue Muta type of situation?
Yeah,
Have y'all
Blue Moon's
experienced?
cool. And we were surprised by this with Ironcutter. Ironcutter is so dense. This is what
Yeah.
has made it able to resist traffic and resist wear. So for a lawn, dogs and people and being out on top of it and recover. Um, you worry when something is that dense and it's a tight plant, even compared to a Bermuda grass plant. A lot of shoots, and the shoot density of it is very, very high. And so you worry about being able to fit any type of seed down into that canopy. And you worry about it getting hung up and whatever little bit of thatch you have, or you worry about it not getting seed to soil contact and it not being what we call a good overseeder. And so I was concerned about that. But as we've gotten it out into the field, I think what it is it's the blade is a little bit more vertical. It's almost more like a zoysia grass leaf, and I probably should have had a picture to show people what I'm talking about. But the seed seems to go into the canopy better than I thought it would. So it's become a better overseeder, and you don't have to do a lot of extra steps or any at all. It's just simple, your typical seeding. Scalp it down, hurt the Bermuda a little bit, open it up as best you can, and then seeding has been normal, and so it's handled it very well. Of course, bluegrass I always feel good with because it's a much smaller seed than perennial ryegrass or tall fescue, so I can get a lot more seeds, smaller seeds down through that canopy.
Hmm.
So it does really well with it. We're going to try to look at a high end install with a blue muta, so it would be a 365 SS iron cutter blue muta type. But it does really well, and I'll say better than I expected it to do. The transition, uh, if you're doing a traditional overseed like a perennial ryegrass, has done well. But we've really opened it up with what I call poly stands, growing two grasses simultaneously year round. Um, you know, Blue Mute is a thing. We're starting to work with tall fescues as they've gotten skinnier and become more bluegrass like while still retaining tall fescue drought tolerance. Like we're putting those together. Um, Poly stands can be good in the right situations. I think they have limited applications for homeowners. I just don't think homeowners would love doing that. But there's some people that I've seen that have certainly done it.
Yeah.
I think certainly of the poly stands, the bluegrass one would be the way to go. Small seeds, a lot of seeds
Yeah.
into a Bermuda grass. So I do like 365 SS as a blue muta, and I like it into iron cutter. And it was a little bit easier to get a good stand year round than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I've when you talk about poly stands, I'm definitely that's the way that I've converted now. Even on the cool season side, I want KBG and tall fescue. It's having both of those blended in together. They just they kind of work, and I don't. I no longer want to grow them separately now because of the benefits that you get from having both of them. And I'm Mountain View seed all the way when it comes cool season
Appreciate
stuff.
that.
So having those, I've been running the 365 SS for what 2 years now, and I've been running the tall fescues for almost 4 years now. So that's just what I blend with. The benefits you get are amazing.
Yeah, they can be. Ben, you've been in St. Louis. I mean, it's one of the toughest places to grow grass in the country. I mean, there's no good option, right? There's no like one great option. So you saw Blue Muta come out of Missouri because of that. Brian Winka and some of the guys that really pioneered it, uh, they had to because nothing was growing well. Now I think we've developed both sides where you can be independent and have a good individual stand of each and their improvements, but then being able to put them together now, it's really opened up a whole new world where we had never tested it that way before because it was always an assumption that well, they'll never play nice. Like they'll never really be symbiotic. They'll really never grow independent of each other, but still be able to live year round. So what we've seen is, yeah, like you can measure clip volume of each, and it's like as soon as the bluegrass turns off, the Bermuda grass starts to turn on, and vice versa, depending on the season. So it's like, okay, that was a bit of a revelation. Like now we can do that, and it's let us go to tall fescue. I mean, we've tested, zoysia and fine fescue together. It's kind of led us in some weird paths to figure out which one. But to me, the strongest and the best is 365 SS because the amount of sports fields and high end sports fields that we've done with it, and how well it's done with traffic, mixed with Ironcutter. That would be the best blue muta stand.
All right, cool. So now let's go ahead and I think let's go ahead and transition into the next phase of this, and we'll kind of take this the rest of the way out. The install, like so, when it comes down to it, when you've made your decision, you want to go with some iron cutter sprigs. Now it's time for you to prep ground, install, and get everything going. Adam, can you walk us through like your recommendation for that process? Just say for the average homeowner, if they were going in, what's kind of your recommended method for that install?
Yeah, so I always like a soil test up front. I want to know what I'm dealing with. I want as many numbers as I can. Try to find any deficiencies that I can correct before I put sprigs in the ground. So any metric, any number that you can get, like that's valuable to me. Soil testing correctly is really important. It's often not talked about enough with seed and sod or sprigging, but you stick a probe 8 inches down into the ground and take the 8 inch bottom of the probe, probably not going to get there for about a year. Uh, Probably want to take more in that 2 inch layer than you do, sticking it way down. And a lot of people do. They just jam it into the ground and they'll take the whole profile. And it's like, you want to take that top couple inches and test that because that will be a lot different than what's way down low. So for us, like we're always looking at shallower profiles, mixing that together, finding out your true deficiencies, and that's a little bit easier to correct. So getting down whatever pre-plants you need to get your soil as right as you can, that's what we want to do, first. And then it's the detail work and just the annoying logistics of calling up the sod farm and getting everything in place and getting your transportation and then being able to get it down, let's say with sod or sprigs, get it down quickly. Have your irrigation lined up, do an audit, figure out how much you're throwing. And there's a ton of projects that we do, even on the pro level, where you'll see a picture and you go, and that's not adequate irrigation coverage. You can just see it, and so it's doing those steps before it gets down on the ground, like looking at all that. But pre-plant, get whatever you need on the ground. Order your material, uh, get your prep work done. Make sure you've got a good smooth bed. Your soil's right. You figured out a way to mechanically apply it efficiently, so you're not just sitting there with sod dying or sitting there with sprigs dying, and then getting in the ground correctly. Whatever method there is, there's a bunch of different ways to do warm season grass. Like warm season grass wants to grow. It's really hard to kill unless you don't water it enough or you don't do the detail work and set up and prep. So once I get it in the ground, however method that is, um, then it's getting as much water to it as you possibly can, and starting to train that plant the right way, where you're going light and frequent, and then you're transitioning to deep and infrequent, over the course of a couple weeks as this grass grows in. And you'll see immediate changes in the plant 2 and 3 days on where the plant's wanting to grow, and you'll see that green. And it's just continuing that. I typically don't like to put fertility on until I see some sort of movement, let's say in a sprigging, operation. So you'll put a sprigging install in, and because of just inherent salt content that's in fertilizer, and certainly granular fertilizer, I don't like to put that fertility on. I like to do it at pre-plant, and then I like to wait until the plant's actively growing and it can take it up. And so then I like to put the fertility down, and that could be 4 days or 7 days. But it's not it's not gospel. I mean, I've certainly seen enough people do it as soon as they put the sprigs down, and it work out fine. Like the plant wants to grow, you just got to really mess up to kill it. And then at that point, it's your training plants, deep infrequent watering, consistent fertility, spoon feeding Bermuda grass. You just want to constantly have lowered input amounts as you're in the growing phase. Which for Bermuda grass, you do it right. I mean, I've seen as little as 30 days from sprigging. I've seen as long as 6 months when it didn't go right. Um, but I typically say 30 to, we'll say 120 days if you're in a rough spot. If you're in a northern transition zone with low soil temps when you did it. Cam, how many days did it take your dad?
Uh, so these pictures that I'm showing right now, this is 7 days after sprigging.
Yeah, you're
Um,
just starting to see some tints. Like, it's starting to turn
yep,
yellowish green, right? Like
yep.
people get freaked out because they're like, oh man, it turned brown, it's dead.
Yeah,
And it's
this is week one post sprigging,
yep,
and then we kind of get into now right here. I think this is 2 weeks post sprigging. So so
so
now so now you kind of start to see it. You start to see that green up starting to happen a little bit there.
yep. Um, so yeah, it's you start to see that process, and then it's spoon feeding fertility, deeper infrequent watering. I like to train my plant as soon as possible, so I let it get up to maybe a little bit higher than the height I want to mow at, and then I'm knocking it down. Which for Bermuda grasses, they like to be cut lower. So if you're somebody that's converting from a cool season grass, 3 inches, 2.5 inches, Bermuda grass is 1.5, I'd say max. I mean, you can certainly grow it at 2 and 3 inches, but it doesn't really take advantage of the plant. It's not inherently how high it wants to grow, even though Ironcutter can do that. It tends to be inch and a half, certainly an inch and under. And getting to that point, you really get the maximum benefits of the plant. You're tightening it up. Um, Maybe less inputs, easier to maintain, but it's all a product of how much you want to mow. But I like to train the plant as soon as possible, so I don't really care how tender the plant is, or as long as I'm not leaving ruts in the ground. I mean, I'm going ahead and training plants because I want that sprig to go lateral, and I want it to grow laterally to fill in, because whatever it's doing on top that you see, it's doing it twofold underneath, and so you're building roots, and you're making the plant grow the way that you want to. You're training it. So I always look to do that and be aggressive on top of it. And I typically wait with any sort of weed control, or you'll get broadleafs, or you'll get whatever that'll pop up, even with the best cultural, or even with the best sprigging take. And so I typically wait 5 weeks, 4 weeks. I mean, I've done it. I think the soonest I've done it is like 3 weeks with a little bit of yellowing, right? But you've got a juvenile plant, and you're putting a chemical on top of it, so you want to be careful with broadleaf or weed control applications. But these new grasses can handle a lot. So outside of quinclorac, I mean, we've tested our grasses on a lot of post emergence. So the tribute totals and the certainties and the Celsiuses and MSMA, and we've tested it, and no issue. We even tested Ironcutter against Pilex, which is
Oh.
designed to kill Bermuda grass, and
Yeah.
then we put it with Syncor, which made it a really hot combination that bleached it. But when we did it at a University of Georgia trial, in 3 replications, it came back. And strangely, that was the best turf quality after 4 weeks in the entire trial. So not only does it not die, it's like when you get aggressive with a Bermuda grass plant,
Hmm.
it likes it. So that's why I tell people, like, don't baby Bermuda grass. Like, rip it up. You don't want to be aggressive maybe with weed control or herbicide applications, but culturally, like, mow it. Once you get it in and get it established, like, rip that thing up, poke it and rip it, and do whatever you need to, and it'll respond. That's what these plants are built for. So yeah, that's how I would put a sprig install in, and hopefully, you're seeing results like what you did, Cam, and same thing with you, Ben, where you're starting to get pretty happy by week 6, maybe.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
really rocking and rolling.
Yeah. All right. So that's the professional take on how how they should be installed and the recommended way of how your spring job should go.
Yep.
Now let's go ahead and spin this around into how we actually applied that. So um, I think Ben and I both we work with Adam. We got advice and everything from Adam, and also Ryan DeMay over there at the Grass Factor, and I talked with Jason um, out there at Worth Collins while I was picking my sprigs and stuff up, and I've been kind of talking to him along the way. So a lot of what these guys are saying is all the same. Like everybody was kind of recommending exactly what Adam just said. Uh, the thing is a lot of times depending on the scale of your project, and hey, we're gonna take it DIY now. So and go ahead and hey, you may or may not have some of the equipment that may be needed, but it's not that difficult or it's not very different from actually prepping the ground for seed. So if you were gonna put seed down, seed to soil contact instead of it being seed, it's just your sprig. You want to make sure you get good contact with your soil. Make sure you take care of any of your weeds or anything like that. Ben and I both started with a clean slate. And if you're converting from warm season, cool season, or if you've just got a bunch of weeds out there in a salad bar at that point, just make sure you take care of your weeds just like any other renovation that you'll be doing. So after taking care of that, weeds are taken care of. Good seed, open soil, seed to soil contact, which here being sprig to soil contact, and making sure your watering is on point. That's gonna be key. And I think that was one of the things I always say this even with seed. Make sure your irrigation and your watering is on point because that's going to be your lifeline to making sure those sprigs get rooted in and they survive. That's that's your money right there. If you've got to spend it anywhere, make sure your watering is on point. Uh, and then from there, just staying on top of like rolling in your sprigs. That's a good thing right there, and we'll get into Ben's renovation process right now. He can kind of walk us through uh, what the way that he approached getting rid of his or doing his renovation. So let me go ahead and we are going to switch screens real quick.
I'd like to first say that my renovation was nothing compared to Cam's because I had in ground irrigation and Cam had to figure out a whole above ground thing, and he was doing basically half an acre. My measly 4,500 square feet was nothing compared to the monster he was doing. So um, yeah, I can't. His project was above and beyond, way more challenging than mine, all things considered. So
Hey, we both reached the finish line. It just I think it took a whole lot more elbow grease for me to get there than it did for you.
yeah, yeah,
I'm trying to think what the biggest job. I think 72 acres is the biggest sprigging that
wow.
we've done with a sod farm. I
Okay,
think ended up being 72 acres.
okay.
Um,
What's the
is
largest? Do you know what size home lawn that y'all have that anyone has sprigged yet?
Honestly, I should, but I don't. I truly don't. There's been some decent size. Again, once you get to the commercial side, the end user side, like, you need a couple years, right, before you
Yeah.
get some monster estates where you're multiple acres. And so I feel like we've done an acre, but I don't know that it's been anything crazy like, somebody does 10 acres in
Yeah,
Texas down somewhere, like
yeah.
I don't think it's been anything, super massive, but it's something I should probably know. I should probably dig into a little bit more because it would be cool to see like who's done the biggest. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
no, you're fine. You're
No,
fine.
and I think those things are like they're like pretty cool facts. Like as y'all grow and y'all get into those bigger establishments. Like we said, Demay's done. I don't know. I think he's done what 4 or 5
Yeah.
football fields or athletic fields up there in Ohio. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool for y'all.
It's nice to have big, but again, like truly, if somebody gets enjoyment and if somebody sees a benefit and it makes their life
Yeah,
easier to grow great grass, man, I don't care if it's 25 square
sure.
feet. Like for us, like we try to treat everybody equally, right?
Yep,
Like whether you're in Northwestern or Central Park or whether you're, a homeowner and wherever you are and you've got a small plot and you want to convert it. Like that's kind of our standard that we want to deal with people because it matters just as much to you. Like it doesn't matter
right.
how big or small it is. Like that's
That's
your world.
yours.
Like
That's
it's
yours.
important if you're going to do a renovation. So we got to feel that way too. But I may have to dig into that, figure out who's the biggest.
So, real quick before we jump in here, Ben, I did see a question in the chat. So, as far as sprigging rates, like say per 1,000 square foot, what would you recommend, Adam? I think I saw that question in the chat. How many bushels, like would and briefly describe what a bushel is because I know people are probably going to be like, what is a bushel?
So, so this is one of the tougher things for people to wrap their head around, and we don't do a good job of defining what a bushel is. There is a U.S. measurement for apples, and for a lot of crops that are bushel based. The turf grass bushel is a different one. You would think, volumetric water and air content equals a certain amount. Typically, what we say to make it easy on end users is 1 square yard of established turf grass. So 1 square yard of Ironcutter equals 1 bushel. And so, when you call up a sod farm, you can always get different rates, and pretty much any farm is going to have different rates. And even when they dig it, there's very few people in the world that can look at a pile of
Yeah,
sprigs and go, "Yeah, that's about a 500 bushel an acre, or that's a 200, or that's an 800, or 1,000." Uh, you almost just have to apply it enough to see what kind of coverage it is. But in general, I just like just broad coverage as non-linear as I possibly can with enough density to cover the ground. I don't like to see a ton of dirt. I mean, we work in sod farm situations where it would shock people how much dirt and how little grass is in up once it gets established and starts establishing. But then from a homeowner standpoint, I don't know why you would do it light because
yeah,
typically you're working with smaller amounts. So for us, on like sod farms, we'll do anywhere from like probably 250 bushels an acre to 800 bushels an acre is getting pretty heavy at the sod farm level. Conversely, I've seen end users go as high as 2,000 bushels an acre and
Phew.
1,500 bushels an acre. That's a lot of grass, but they're tight time frame. They're trying to get
Yeah,
something established really quickly, and they want to get it off to a good quick start, even for Bermuda grass. For most homeowners, I don't know, 500 to 800 is probably a good range. That's probably a good combination of money spent, establishment, and quickness um, versus the quality of what you'll get in a springing job. You just don't want to skimp too much, but it's hard without having an exact parameter. So I mean, breaking down 500 bushels to an acre to square feet, you would just have to knock that down, whatever
yeah,
whatever that is, reduce it down to it, and it's a certain amount of bushels per thousand. That's what you're looking for. But it's just making sure that there's consistent, even coverage, not a lot of chunks or piles out there. It's smooth over, roll flat, and consistent throughout your stand with a good press, good seed to soil contact, or sod sprig to soil contact, and and you'll be successful. It's hard to make. It's hard to go to a sod farm and go, well, I'd like 500 bushels, and know farm to farm what they're going to give you, because
Yeah.
so much of that changes, But in general, I'd say end user 500 to 800 bushels an acre.
Yeah. And I'll say, just for reference, I can't remember who asked that question in here, but
It
um,
was the D Lands
okay.
14. That was the person that asked.
Okay. All right. Um, I will just say, for reference, we went down 20,000 square feet. We went down with 400 bushels on 20,000 square feet. So that's about equivalent to 800 bushels an acre.
800 bushels.
But
So top
equivalent to
end,
about
good,
eight.
heavy.
Yeah, yeah. We went a little on the heavier side, which is kind of where were at. And Ben, I think you were around. I think you went 200
Yeah,
bushels for yours, right?
Tom Keevan recommended. I should say Tom Keevan Jr. recommended.
Yep.
He recommended 200 bushels for me. So that's crazy that I put 200 down on a quarter of what you did. Because,
And that's where I think that's where a sod
but
farm,
that's what you
it
were
can be a
saying, Adam. Like,
resource.
it could like. I feel like 200 might have looked
Yep.
different for my 200 might not have actually been half of the 400 you got.
I,
It could have been,
I
you
think my
know,
400 was more than 400. To be honest with you.
Well, here's the thing, and this is why I say it's hard to pin down a sod farmer, because they always want you to do well, right? Like,
Yeah.
but Tom
Yeah.
knows the local conditions, Ben and did when you were doing it, so of course he wants you to overdo it a little bit, and it's to me it's worth it to pay that, because
Yeah.
you're talking about something that not knowing what you paid for each number of bushels, but it's not $10 a bushel, and so you're
Yeah.
going, okay, it's worth that, to get a little bit more, especially as you get smaller and smaller for the area. I mean, yeah, the farm's going to pull out the harvester, and they're going to want to put 200 bushels in the back of your trailer. That's pretty easy to do. So, whether you get a lot, just make sure you don't get a little.
A
I mean,
little.
yeah,
if you
Yeah.
don't want
yeah,
to have coverage, you don't want to sit there and go, man, I wish I'd have gotten more sprigs
Yeah.
once you put it down. So, yeah, go a little bit over. There's no standard rate, um, but there are guidelines. There's bumper guards, I guess, that you can find. So I'd say between 500 and 800 bushels an acre.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So, being your process, I'll just go ahead and say this is kind of where you started off at, right? This was the start of when you decided it was you were
that
going
was
with
yeah, that
Bermuda.
was right before the I sprayed it out. That was when that picture was taken when I was starting to lower the height of cut of the tall fescue that was there.
Okay.
So it was probably I think the before I sprayed it out, I got it down to around 2 inches, um, and then I sprayed it out. Um,
Yep.
and then yeah, I sprayed it out like April something, um, and then it just obviously 2 weeks, let it do its thing and die. Um, and I did do two applications of glyphosate, just to try to knock it out even more and anything else that was there, just to try to come to start with as clean of a slate as possible. I will say before we go any further, I started the reason why I did this in the first place was because I dealt with just high disease pressure every season in my tall fescue, and that's partly because I know not entirely, but partly because my pH was so high. When we moved in, my pH was an 8.3, and over the last 3 seasons, I dropped it down to I think it's 7.5, or somewhere around there. I know it's something around there, um, and it was just the amount of money you spend on fungicides. You're just trying. It's a balancing act. Like once the transition from late spring into summer, it's pretty much like it's an uphill battle, or at least was for me an uphill battle every year. And just the money that I was spending on fungicides is like, this isn't worth it to me. I want to do this, and I had experience with Bermuda, so I grew up down in Dallas. I knew what Bermuda was capable of. And
Right.
then I played around with common Bermuda at my old house, and before we moved out here, had a 200 to 300 square foot area that I was just played with and plugged. And I saw the potential of Bermuda in St. Louis there. And then when I heard about Ironcutter, because everything I heard about Bermuda up here is like, oh, it doesn't have the cold tolerance. You know, you're gonna have a lot of die off and this, that, and the other. So I heard about Ironcutter, and that's when I talked to Demay and Matt and Ray last year about doing this. And I think it was actually before I went on the show last year. I saw a picture that Ray, or not Ray, Ryan had posted of a field he did in Ohio, and I was like, if they're going Bermuda in Ohio, there's no way I can't grow it here. And
Right.
then I saw Adam. I that was the first time I saw you on Instagram, and you were saying, yeah, they grow it right here in at Heartland. I was like, oh
Yes.
man, if they're growing it here at a sod farm and selling it, then it's tried and true and it's good to go. Like I'm not I don't need to worry about anything. So that's when I was like, all right, I'm gonna take this project on. Spend the money to renovate basically half my yard to be, for the most part, a lot less maintenance. Obviously, there's more mowing if I want to keep it at a lower height of cut and stuff like that. But I'm down with mowing more frequent. I'm not down with spending, $300-400 every season purely on fungicides.
That's the
And
enjoyment
even
part of it. The
yeah,
mowing.
exactly. And even when you spending that kind of money on fungicides and trying to dial that fungicide program in, it's not like the lawn's like immaculate and looking that great in the
Right.
summer. It's still struggling. Like you got to baby the water. You got to make sure you're on point with your fungicide apps. So for me, that's when I heard about Ironcutter and the potential. I was like, done. We're doing it. I already have a half my yard that's a perfect plot because this plot right here is, like I said, it's 4,500 square feet. It's all southern facing. It gets sun all day long. I was like, this is the greatest area to do it. And it was actually funny because, not funny, because this was the side of the tall fescue of my yard and with tall fescue that always looked the best. So I was like, man, it's even harder to kill all this off because it wasn't the worst area. My front and back are the worst areas when it comes to the tall fescue. But regardless, I still knew I wanted to pull the trigger. So yeah, it was a combination of lots of planning over winter to get my ducks in a row before I ever started it, and I was chomping at the bit. Once winter was tapering off and spring was happening, I was like, I thought I needed to go like right then and there. But I was a bit ahead of the game. I killed it off, and the lawn sat for probably I don't know, a couple weeks with sand top dressed. Before the Heartland that was ready to harvest the sprigs. But anyway, yeah, the process for me was killing it off with glyphosate. Um, and prior to killing it off, I just mowed it down a little bit lower prior to killing it off, just so I had less material I had to deal with later down the road. And as it was starting to die off, I was still, cutting off. I was lowering the height of cut as it went, just so, because I was still dealing with. There's still some green material, so it's not dry hay like it is when it's completely dead and done.
Mhm.
Um, so then once I got it as low as I could with my rotary mower, I took a power rake through it. Um, I think I did 2 or 3 passes, and I did what Matt and Ray joke about. I've heard him joke about it in
Oh,
regards to pulling a
pulling it
power rake
backward.
backward. I did that. I did that because I was like, I want to tear up this as much as I can to expose as much to the ground. And yeah, that's about that. Those pictures is what I got that area to basically look like. And I knew I didn't need to go anymore. Well, I didn't know because I sent pictures to Ray or Ryan. I was like, "Is this good? Am I good? Do I need to go over it again? Because please tell me I don't need to." Because at this, I had 40 bags of yard waste bags after
Phew.
running the power rake through it, and these are 30 or 40 gallon paper bags, whatever they are. And then after that, I turf culture actually let me use his aerator. That thing was a lifesaver because it's not your traditional drum aerator. This has a split drum, so it's easier to work with. It's more like a lawnmower than it is the traditional ones that pull you along. This was awesome. But I aerated, and then the next day I um, went down with it was between 4 and 5 yards of sand, masonry sand. So that was good to fill in those holes that I created the night before with the aerator. And unfortunately, I had to do all this by hand. I rented a top dresser, but then the top dresser stopped working like 10 minutes after into using it. So I had to spread it all by hand, Ben Sims style with a shovel. Um, so yeah,
Wow.
then that sat. I think I can't remember the exact time frame, but it sat for a couple weeks before um, Heartland was ready to start harvesting. And then we went. I was there like bright and early, 6 7 a.m. ready to go. I was there before the sod farmers were there. They got their machine out, and you played the clip. That was the clip from when Brandon and I from Turf Culture went and picked
Mm.
up the sprigs. Um, they only had to make one pass straight down the field, and that was pretty much it. They probably gave us a bit more than 200 because they were, which was fine with me. I mean, I think the guys just, they wanted me to be successful, and I know that's why Tom recommended 200 because he said you're going to have die off, so you might
Yeah.
as well go with 200. I was like, all right, cool. And for anybody who's wondering, I went with 200 bushels, and for Heartland they charged $3 per bushel, so it's $600 for those bushels, which in the grand scheme of things really isn't that expensive when you think about like sod. So I was okay with that price, and so yeah, we were within a couple hours. We had them within an hour. We had them back in my house, and then at least it didn't take us long. There was three of us or four of us total. Big shout out to a lot of the couple of lawn care guys in the community that came out and helped me. Um, had them down. As soon as it went down, I put water on them. I tried to use a toe behind spike aerator to kind of crimp them into the ground, but it really wasn't doing anything. So rather than wasting the time and letting the clock tick on these guys, I was like, I'm not going to bother with it. And Brandon and the other guys that were there, to Sean and Randy, they were just like, you might as well just soak the lawn down and then just fill your roller up all the way up and then just roll over them. And that was probably the best thing because once I saturated the ground even more, because I had already watered a little bit the ground some prior to sprigging because I wanted the ground to be wet when I put the sprigs down. But prior to rolling, I wet it down, ran the sprinklers even more just to get it nice and soaked, and then I ran over the yard with the roller, and that really just helped push them into the ground. I went over the whole yard probably half a dozen times, just going over and over and over, just excuse me,
Great
rolling
call.
into the. What's that?
So that was a great call to make that decision, and that's the kind of stuff that you have to deal with sprigging. Of it's not going to go perfect. It rarely does, like you draw it up. But that was a great move while you were in the middle of a renovation. That was a key move to do that. So good job there.
Yeah, well, I have to my helpers there helped me make that recommendation. 'Cause I was kind of like, oh man, what do I need to do here? Because this was like a little hiccup in the process. And like, because when I talked to Demay last year, he was just like, do your sand cap like I did, put the sprigs down and roll it in. And then when I talked to you, Adam, you're like, well, you want to try to crimp them in. So then I was trying to do, add that to the process. And so since all I had at that point in time, because Cam was talking about, as a DIYer and homeowner, if you're doing this yourself, you're just trying to use the equipment you have at your disposal to do
It's true.
something that the sod farmers do and the guys do at the golf courses when they do these types of things. And um, I would recommend for anybody doing this, I wouldn't, uh, you know, Cam was successful doing it the way I did, is just soak the yard down after you put the sprigs down, or make sure the ground's pretty soaked, and then just get a roller and roll it, a couple
Yeah.
times or several times, just to get them as best into the ground as you can, because we just don't have that uh,
Yeah.
those tools. Because I tried to use, actually, my neighbor had a scarifier, because you were mentioning a scarifier,
Yep.
Adam, when I spoke to you, and that seemed to be, what I was worried about with that is those machines tend to like clump things up and then
Yep.
like pile it, and so it was starting to do that, and it's kind of like undoing some of the rolling. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna roll it in, just call it a day, roll it as much as I can, put water on it, because then once you roll it and then you put water on it, the water also helps get it down into the ground
Yeah.
too. Um,
It
the
was a
one
good
thing I
call.
would
It
Yeah,
was.
the one thing I would say, if somebody is going to do this, if you're going to try to use a scarifier, the one thing that I would do is scarify the sand or the ground prior to, because it will make those rows. Um, and then you could put the sprigs down, and roll it in. But the only thing about that is just your timeline. I was trying to do everything as fast as I could because I knew, like you were saying, Adam, the clock's ticking on the
Clock's ticking.
sprigs, and the longer they're not on the ground getting water, the worse off you are. So, um, once I had that down, I just hit them with water, um, and kept it pretty soaked. The biggest challenge for me, was the little slope on the hill. That area dried out the quickest, and just the way my zones are set out for my irrigation, that area was really hard to get a lot of water on without flooding other areas of my yard, just because of how the irrigation zones were set up. And so what I would do is, I would just, rather than running entire zones, I would just pull out. I had a impact sprinkler just sitting up on the near the fence, right across from where that tree is, and I would just turn that on if I noticed that area was drying out, but everything else was fine. The other areas that was challenging was the parkway right here. Um, that was the another area where the ground around the sprinklers were fine, but there's not extremely great coverage from the sprinklers in the main part of the yard that get the parkway here. So you had areas that would dry out a little bit quicker, which I kind of already knew that, because with the tall fescue, this is the area that I'd get a lot of hot spots and things start to dry out. So, um, the biggest thing I was worried about when it came to all this was getting a huge monsoon rain, because I had this slope, and I didn't want
Yep.
to deal with that and go to my neighbor the next day after a storm, like, hey, you're going to have a Bermuda yard, like having to deal with that. I was really fortunate to not have to deal with that. Because
I wasn't so fortunate, but I'm glad I was on flat land.
yeah, yeah. Because it wasn't, we got some pretty heavy rains around, I want to say like 3, 4 weeks or so after. And at that point in time, the sprigs were tacked down. Things were starting to hold things in place. I had plants there to hold the sand in place to a degree, and all that kind of stuff. The one thing I would say is, on that slope, um, when I would get those heavy rains, it wasn't obviously a full yard of grass, so the sand was still washing down off that slope, but I did have some plants there that would essentially catch the grass, and then it'd wash through, and it was kind of creating like a tiered, almost like a steps of sand, because it would like wash down, grass would catch it, wash down, grass would catch it. So there's a little bumpier along there, just because of the nature of it being a slope and having to deal with some of the heavier rains when there was the growing happening. So, um, aside from that, it was that was my biggest troubles, was just the slope, and figuring out the watering in that area, and keeping it going. I started fertilizing 2 weeks out after sprigging. I just went down with the triple 10, um, did 2 pounds, so I was just getting a quarter pound of NPK, and I did that roughly every week, um, just to kind of spoon feed it. And then I didn't do my first mow until July 3rd, so it was about 4 weeks in. Um, and yeah, the mow is satisfying on this bottom part that's flat, because that area was the part that was I had no concerns about. I was like, okay, you're on cruise control, you'll be fine.
Right.
All the water would run down there in that area. That was the area that I was talking about, that would generally flood and get too much water if I ran all the irrigation when it wasn't needed. When I did my first mow, it was mainly just cutting down the nut sedge that I had to deal with, because I had a good infestation of nut sedge in certain areas. But yeah, I started with the rotary mower. Um, did that. I think I probably had it around an inch, inch and a half. Inch and a half is probably the sweet spot. The rotary mower for me, at least for how bumpy the yard currently is. And then I got a manual reel, had that for a couple weeks, and then I got finally bought a California trimmer, which I have now cutting the grass around. Um, it's around an inch.
Yeah.
Um, so I would like to go a little lower. I didn't top dress anymore after my initial sanding in the process before sprigging. I could have. I just, I don't have an area where I can get a load of sand dropped off because I'm in a neighborhood. It's not like I have a huge area of land that I could just have like 10 yards of sand sitting by when using it when I need it. So I have to order it, you know, by, I didn't want to order like a single yard and do one small area because my delivery fee is the same amount regardless of how much I'm getting. So um, I was happy with where I got it. I got it, like I said, it's around an inch, and I was like, I just want to enjoy it for the rest of this year. It's really great for how it is right now. I know I can work on this in years to come, and make it even better, make it smoother, so I can lower the height of cut a little bit more and go from there. So the other aspect of the top dressing is I didn't want to have to do it all by hand again, and I know that's probably what I'll have to do because I just don't trust the top dressers I have at my disposal currently. So plus that, just the renting the top dresser is another added expense to it. So um, doing it by hand is like, well, it's more labor, but I'm saving money. You can weigh out the pros and cons. Like, yes, but I'm out there sweating way more than I would be if I had a top dresser. So it's whatever you want to look at it. Um, but so yeah, that was kind of my story. That's where I'm at right now. I love every bit of it. My weed pressure wasn't terrible. We did a
No,
lot of what's that?
no, it looked good. I mean, it's all of it looked pullable. I mean, nuts edge, different story, but didn't see a lot of broadleafs there.
No, there was. It was. It wasn't bad. It was a lot of grassy weeds. There was goosegrass, crabgrass. I'm not the greatest at identifying all the different types of grassy weeds, but I know there's other stuff in there that I knew would be fine if I pulled. My wife and I actually pulled a lot. My mind was like, if I can pull, 10, 15 weeds a day, that does, and I do that each day, I can knock this relatively small area of grass out or lawn out pretty quickly and not have to worry about spraying an herbicide. I've only done one herbicide application, and that was I used Sedgehammer on the nut sedge, and it knocked it out. I mean, it's all gone now. So, yeah, the other aspect of the weeds that I wasn't really worried about is I knew they were going to die in the winter. Uh, and then once I got in a good pre-emergent game,
Yeah.
most of them weren't coming back anyway because I knew the ones that were there they were going to die in the winter, and I knew they were
Yep.
ones that would be prevented with a pre-emergent. So um, that's the other thing. I knew this is a marathon, a long term game. I'm not having to get this thing ready for an athletic event or have it golf ready for some sort of big thing. I was on my time. I didn't need to make this thing um, as best as it can look all in one year. I can chip away at it, and for right now, I'm really happy with how good it looks because I think it looks great for where it started and all that kind of stuff. So
Me too. Looks great.
Cool. Yeah, Ben, I gotta say, where you're at right now, it's cooking. It's
Very
cooking
much
a,
so.
it's
It
cooking
looks
a,
great.
yeah. So just one of the difference, I guess, from me and Ben, we kind of started the same way. I mean, kill off, same way. I got it down to everything being dead. And that's just kind of how it starts. One of the difference is that I was working with, like I said, 20,000 square feet. So we're looking at almost a half an acre on the project that I was doing. So from a ground prep standpoint, this is what we were rolling with. I actually went with a Harrow drag behind my old school Honda here that's been a trusty piece of equipment for me. Not only just in the yard. I mean, I plant food plots and everything else for deer hunting and everything else. So this Harold Dragon and the ATV has been a key for me. So we went through. This is the area that we were dealing with. Got everything broken up, and I think I've got a video in here of us once we've got done. This is all the old centipede. So we actually hauled off almost four trailer loads of centipede grass out of there. Once we got everything broken up with the drag, uh, and then we came back in. The next thing was with the aerator. So we came in aerated, as you see my dad over here on the ride on the left. He was aerating, breaking the ground up. He had already covered this area, and I was working the next area with the drag, and that's kind of how we got it all prepped. We came back behind it with a sweeper and swept up all the debris, and that's how we got everything up and off, and we got it onto the trailer, got all of that hauled off. So this process was used over the whole 20,000 square feet, and again, using what you got. There was no fancy equipment at all, other than renting an aerator. You can rent a ride on aerator pretty easy from your local sub belt or something like that. If you're dealing with a smaller area, they've got the walk behinds. So yeah, not too bad there. One thing that I did want to do is I actually wanted to use a Harley rake. That's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to Harley rake it, kind of slick the surface down a little bit, kind of smooth some things out. But I actually didn't have a chance to be able to do that. But I would have came back in with a drag, like a smooth drag, and leveled it. That would have been the one thing that I would have changed after we got everything broken up and cleaned up. If we had came back in and just drug it with something more like a lawn leveler, and then been able to smooth everything out just a little bit more than what it was. That change I think would have helped me out a little bit in the later process of where we are right now with the mowing. But other than that, that was the ground prep, pretty similar to what Ben was doing on his spring and day. Not much different, other than I did get mine in super sacks. So I actually had a U-Haul full of the super sacks, which, as Adam was talking about before, that's where time becomes of the essence. So as they are all the sprigs that are down here at the bottom, they're getting hot. Like you got to get them out and get them on the ground. They're not getting as much air circulation, so that's where time was of the essence for us to get them out on the ground. As we were putting them out, I actually had irrigation running while we were putting the sprigs out because the area was so large. So we just kept moving these two sprinklers around all day, and that's kind of how we got it done, keeping everything good and moist and soaked, like Ben was saying. That way, as soon as we got done, the next thing we did is came in and rolled it. Same as what Ben's process was. The ground was already soaked. The irrigation actually ran all day long on that day. So it just was what it was. We did have irrigation set up that we would have it on a timer and everything following that. But given that day, we wanted to make sure that we were moving it around and getting it where we wanted it as things were drying out. Um, so as I jump back in here, once the sprigs went down, next time I was down was 3 weeks later. So this is kind of what we were looking like 3 weeks after that. I got some establishment. Ben didn't have as many weeds as what I did. I had a lot of weed pressure, and I'll be honest, when I pulled up and I was like, this is a dumpster fire. Like this, this is bad. It was a lot more weeds than what I knew it was going to be. Some weeds. I was just hoping it was going to be a more broadleafs than grassy weeds. Grassy weeds are just tough to deal with. Broadleafs, you can pretty much fry them fairly easy without anything really that harsh. Uh, but when we came back in 3 weeks later, we actually rolled it again, put the first cut on it, scalped it all the way back as low as we could get it to, like what Adam was saying, beat it up. It likes to be cut low anyway. So we scalped it all the way back as low as the mower would get it for two reasons: to get the weeds and stuff down so they weren't taking up as much space, and then to also give the Bermuda some more room for it to be able to grow. So scalped it back, rolled it, and we put fertilizer on it. We went with a simple 19 is what we went down with. Phosphorus levels are already high on the lawn. We had already did a soil test, so there's really no need for us to put any more phosphorus down. So N and K is all we went down with. So this is kind of what it was looking like from a high level view when we went back, and this is 3 weeks later. So fairly decent coverage, just in 3 weeks. And this is before we cut it. So once we cut it, of course, it scalped it back and it looked a little more bare after we cut it. But uh, knowing that we have establishment, Bermuda's gonna do what Bermuda does, and at that point, you know it's gonna spread. So yeah, not looking too bad. Just 3 weeks out. At the 6 week mark is kind of where things really started to change. You kind of jump in and you don't think that this is only 6 weeks after what you just saw, as far as when we went down with the Sprig. So not looking bad at all. You can see that we had a lot of grassy weeds in there, and this was also the point of where we sprayed out a lot of those weeds. So at this point, we sprayed at the 6 week mark and at the 9 week mark. So we sprayed twice so far, and at this point, we're gonna leave it at that. Whatever weeds are left, which is not many, they'll die off in the winter, and we'll get on a pre-emergent program, and we'll be good to go. This was probably one of the weediest areas that we had right here uh, throughout the growing process. So that's actually cleaned up a whole lot right now. So we'll jump to my next check-in when we had it, which was right around the 9 week mark. So that was about a week ago when I was down, and this is kind of what we're looking like a week ago. Uh, I can't be mad at this.
That's nice.
Yeah, I can't be mad at this. We had just started. We were in the process of cutting, as you can see these couple of streaks here. We were trying to get the height of cut set and try to figure out where we were gonna cut it. Right now, it's at 2 inches, based on the level of the lawn. Next summerish, about the same time we put the sprigs down, we're gonna scalp it back and do a heavy sand leveling on it and get it leveled and get it down to about a inch and a half is probably where we're gonna cut it at.
Good enough.
So yeah, this is kind of what it's looking like right now. Can't be mad at this at all. As you can see, a lot of the weed pressure and stuff we were able to take care of. A lot of the weed pressure that we've got going right there, and we've been fertilizing about every 3 weeks when I get down, and that's all we've been doing. Just nothing fancy, just a 19 on 19 and letting it ride. So
It's
Uh,
dark,
I
man.
I did
Both your
I
lawns
also
are dark.
I also just want to say, Cam, you had it way harder than me because you were also coaching your dad through it. Because you weren't looking at it every day,
oh
so
yeah,
you were getting information off the phone from
yeah,
your dad and trying to help and guide him through what to do and those types of things from a distance. So, where on my case, I was looking at mine every day.
yeah.
Uh, so again. your project was, hats off to you and props to you for doing all this with a half an acre, and then not being able to be on it and seeing it every day. Because how often were you seeing it?
Like every 3 weeks.
Yeah, no, I would
I
be
mean,
I'd be pulling my
yeah.
hair out like.
So yeah, I
The
was
hair
there.
bank.
So we sprigged it, and then I was there. So that's where my check-ins were, 3, 6, and 9. And 9 weeks was like a week ago.
Yeah.
And
Looking looking really great.
this is kind of what the density is looking like right there. So yeah, I can't complain. I think we're in a good spot right there, and all I gotta say for people that are interested in it, um, I would say definitely consider it. Depending on where you're located. Um, Adam, is there any way that they could reach out, or any information as far as finding like growers or anybody, side farms or anywhere that's kind of close to them, or you all have
Yeah,
a
I'll give you a
database?
list. Yeah, we should probably put up a list on our website, but we just hadn't done it yet on where to find Ironcutter. So I think we're getting to the point now where that would be useful for a lot of people. So yeah, I'll give you a list.
Okay,
Certainly can put it up. Probably need to put it up on the website here. Might be
okay,
winter before we do it. We're still in planting season. That fall planting season is a big deal for sod producers. So
yeah,
starting to get into that. But yeah, we'll certainly get the information out to people so they can find it.
okay, cool. Any departing words as we get ready to close out, and anything you want to say, Adam? We'll start with you with your closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed, right? Like from our side, I mean, we see a lot of the building and the development, but I mean, you truly like you guys take it and do more with it than we hope. So, I mean, I just thankful and grateful, and I want to see other people do it, and whether it's my Bermuda or somebody else's, or I want people to have success with sprigging or sodding, or just bring enjoyment and being able to get out on the lawn and provide some benefits. So I'd like to see more people try it, and yeah, just thankful that you guys took the plunge and did it. And you did a hell of a job, both of you, to be commended, because there's always something you got to adjust. When you're
Yeah,
doing something like that, that's that what you save in money, you got to adjust a little bit more than sod. So
yeah,
once you're comfortable with that and have done it, it's easy to do again. But that first time and doing it on a plot that large, man, it takes a little bit of commitment. So uh, it's good to see, and like I said, both grateful, thankful for the both of you. You did a great job. Both lawns look fantastic. They really do.
cool. Appreciate that, Adam. Ben.
Yeah, I just want to say, thanks for your help, Adam, too, because you were a big resource to lean on when I was in doubts at times and not sure what to do during the process and even before the process. But just want to say thanks, and I would also just say to anybody that's considering it, or having their doubts about it, because I get messages and comments about people having doubts about it, and the biggest thing I can say is um, the old mindset of what Bermuda could do in farther up north is not the same anymore. And I know that's Adam. Would you probably agree with me on that? Is don't be turned away by winter kill, or it not staying as green as long, or not greening up as fast, because that's just not the case with these newer varieties like Ironcutter.
Yeah, it surprised us. It was wild to see where we thought it would adapt, naturalize, whatever you want to call it. It's been much further north than even we thought. So I want to see. I truly I don't know where it's going to die. I want somebody to take it, come back, and go, well, it died, and at least then we know it's cool season grass at that point. But we truly have not found that yet. So I guess it's on to Canada, and it's Washington State and Montana, and there's places where I think it can still do well. But we'll figure out where it can die, and then we'll know where to stop, and that'll be cool season grass territory. But yeah, I mean, give it a shot. The worst thing it can do is die, and then you'll know, and then you won't have you won't have one more variable to think about. But these, to my knowledge, hadn't died yet. We have not seen a loan, to my knowledge, that I know about that has gotten any kind of winter kill, and we've put it in some pretty harsh places.
Cool. So once again, I want to thank y'all. Appreciate it, Adam, for coming through, letting us know all the knowledge that you've got, the background on Ironcutter. Ben, thank you for helping me out here in the chat, and also appreciate you for sharing your process and everything. And again, everybody, we've been all warm season today. I'll probably be posting, well, not probably, but I will be posting some additional videos with more detail on my irrigation setup and my ground prep and all of that stuff. So you'll be seeing those videos and everything coming out. And you'll get more detailed information on how I went about it through all of that. And again, make sure you check out Adam over there at MVP Genetics and all the other things that they've got going on. And then also the other side, which is Mountain View Seed for your cool season. So
Thank you.
it's that time for cool season also. So make sure you're checking out the seed. I've made a couple of videos on that also. Of course, renovation and overseeding time is coming up, so you'll be seeing my video for that coming soon also. So uh, hope y'all have a good one, and appreciate y'all fellas for joining us, and we'll catch y'all later.
Thanks, gang.
All right, thanks fellas.